All right, let's do this. The final embryology lesson, development of the eye and ear. It will be very simple. So let's start with just getting an idea about the anatomy of the eye real quick, just to remind you before we get to development, because it will be similar. You obviously got the pupil. You obviously got the lines here, the sclera. You see these lines out there? That's the sclera. The sclera. The iris. There's the iris, and there's the sclera. Right, and if we look at it from inside, you'll see the iris, the lens, the cornea, the sclera, and this is the retina and the posterior chamber, as we know. And this is the optic nerve. All right, I want you to get familiar with the anatomy of the eye because the development will be parallel to it. All right, so let's start. So with the development of the eye first, we'll see that it has an otic vesicle, but I wanted to take a cut section, all right? I wanted to take a cut section, and then I wanted to see this piece inferiorly. I wanted to see it from an inferior view. See, what's exactly inside it, all right? So just to remind you, you know this the head of the embryo, and you know this is going to be the prosencephalon. This is going to be the forebrain, right? Then midbrain, then hindbrain. Just keep that in mind, right? This side is going to be the forebrain. Right, I'm cutting the cut section of the forebrain. And when I do a cut section, this is the views I'm going to get. So let's start with the one on the left. All right, that's going to start. What am I looking at first? First, I'm looking at this lumen. This is a lumen of the neural tube. Which part of the lumen of the neural tube? The prosencephalon. If you want to be real specific, we got to say this is the diencephalon. All right, we're looking at basically the diencephalon region, right? Since we're cutting on this region. And the prosencephalon going to differentiate onto diencephalon. And we will see from the diencephalon, which كانت عبارة عن neuroectoderm, which neuroectodermal cells that consist of each part of the neural tube. Well, these neuroectodermal cells, they're going to start to proliferate outwards. They're going to form an outwards, all right? And you're going to form these optic grooves. Then these optic grooves are going to form grooves, outpocketing grooves or outpocketing pouches going to extend laterally, laterally to form the optic vesicle. Vesicle and a small space, okay? للي بعده الoptic vesicle. Now these optic vesicles, they're going to start to continue to grow in a lateral direction until they come in contact with the surface ectoderm هنا اللي حواليها اللي هي الجراي color. تمام ده surface ectoderm. You see, when the optic vesicle, when it comes in contact with the surface ectoderm, it's going to induce the surface ectoderm portion of it to thicken. All right, a portion of it to thicken. عشان كده يسموها بلاكود. يسمى الحالة دي بلاكود. بلاكود معناها a thickened portion of the ectoderm. بقت thicken. بس كلمة بلاكود. Now this thickened portion of the ectoderm, it will give you the lens. You remember the picture of the lens? تمام? So it's going to induce the lens placode. All right, formation. And this is the lens placode, and it has a pit. All right, it's going to have a pit. So my optic pit. Now, as this lens placode is formed, you see the optic vesicle is going to invaginate. There's going to be invaginating optic vesicle. Yani it's going to fold in itself from this direction, all right? And it's going to form basically two structures now from the optic vesicle. One structure is going to be known as the optic cup. The optic cup. And the optic cup, which you can see right here resembles like a cup, is going to give you the retina, all right? Also, the optic vesicle, while it's forming you the optic cup, the optic vesicle was also giving you the optic stalk. You see the stalk, this basically connection ما بين الoptic vesicle مع diencephalon. This is the optic stalk, and this optic stalk is very important because this optic stalk, تمام, is going to give you, or is going to form the optic nerve. All right, the optic nerve. So what did we get from this so far? We get from this that the neuroectoderm of the diencephalon are going to proliferate from a lateral direction, just a small portion of it to give you optic grooves, and optic grooves become optic vesicles. Then the optic vesicles will come in contact with the surface ectoderm, induce the surface ectoderm to proliferate, thicken to form the lens placode. All right, and then the optic vesicle is going to invaginate, and it's going to invaginate to form finally two structures. The one previously was the optic stalk, تمام, which is going to give you the optic nerve, and it's going to form the optic cup, all right, which is going to be giving you the future retina. All right, perfect. So let's look at this picture in greater detail. And before we go into this picture in greater detail, I want to just clarify one more thing. لما بيحصل invagination, تمام, when there's invagination of the optic vesicle, invagination بيحصل in the central region, all right, في السنتر بالضبط في السنتر عشان يعطيك الاوبتيك كاب. بعدها بيكمل بس شويه في الانفيريور فيو، بيكمل invagination وبيعطيك حاجه structure جديد اسمها optic fissure or choroid fissure. فلو انا شفت الصوره دي الحين دي، Okay, لو أنا شفتها في inferior lateral view, this is what I would get. And I just want you to look at the choroid fissure, يسموها optic fissure. This fissure معناها small opening, neural opening. فائدتها إن there will be an artery that will pass through this neural opening. تمام, there will be an artery. And this artery will be the central artery of the retina. And the reason we should know about this choroid fissure is because at some point when the artery passes through, right, like in this artery, when it passes through basically through the retina to supply the retina, the central artery of the retina, it should obliterate, it should be closed, all right? The optic fissure should be disintegrated. If it didn't, it will give to an anomaly that we'll see shortly, okay? It's going to give an embryological anomaly that we're going to see shortly, all right? But just keep that in mind, that the choroid fissure, optic fissure, is formed by invagination of the optic vesicle down the center and also through the inferior surface, okay? Through an inferior portion. يعطيك optic cup مع choroid fissure, وقلنا optic vesicle بيعطيك الoptic stalk كمان, okay? تمام. So now let's look at this picture again. This is from the lecture actually. The same as I said before. Take a transverse section, this is what you would see, right? And like I said, this region, this entire region, the diencephalon. The neuroectoderm of the forebrain, or the diencephalon, is going to give you the optic groove, then optic vesicle. The optic vesicle is going to give you the optic stack. لو كملتها هنا ويعمل لما optic vesicle come in contact with the surface ectoderm, okay? Like we said before, it's going to induce it to form the lens placode. This is the lens placode with an optic pit, okay? And it's going to invaginate the optic vesicle to form the optic cup. About on two walls, okay? And then as we continue, if we want to focus on the lens placode, this lens placode is going to start to invaginate as well. Not just the optic vesicle, but the lens placode as well. It's going to invaginate this direction. It's going to invaginate until what happens? It's going to separate itself from the surface ectoderm, and it's going to form a new structure. This circular structure, so مش optic, ما قصدي optic. It will not form the lens placode. It's going to be known as the lens vesicle. Okay, so كانت lens placode taken portion separated by invagination بيعطيك lens vesicle. This lens vesicle will be your derivative of the lens. All right, this is going to give you the lens of the eye. والoptic cup زي ما قلنا عبارة عن two walls هنشوفها. This will give you the retina. And the optic stack from behind, connecting it with the diencephalon, is going to give you the optic stack from behind is going to give you the optic nerve. So what did we learn so far? That the development of the eye is going to be developed from four sources. We looked at two of them. One of them was the neuroectoderm of the forebrain, اللي يسموه هنا نفس الشيء diencephalon. وبليز جست افتكرها neuroectoderm forebrain يعني نفسها الاوبتيك كاب، يعني اوبتيك ما اوبتيك كاب، اوبتيك فيسيكل، يعني اوبتيك فيسيكل والنeuroectoderm of the forebrain نفس الشيء. Okay, so it will give you the retina, right? It will give you the optic nerve, the optic stalk, right? The optic vesicle and all that. And it's also going to give you the posterior layer of the iris. What does it mean by posterior layers of the iris? يعني بتعطيك السفنكتر والدايليتر pupilli تمام الكلام زي دي، وهنشوفها okay. وشفنا كمان السيرفيس اكتوديرم، مش ده كانت سيرفيس اكتوديرم ايش كانت بتعطيك اللينس بلاكود، واللينس بلاكود بقت اللينس فيسيكل وتعطيك اللينس. So the surface ectoderm of the head was giving you the lens as well. وحتعطيك حاجه كوني اندوثيليوم بس ثانيه هنشوفها. طيب these two sources so far. Other two sources include the mesoderm between the neuroectoderm and the surface ectoderm. يعني this region right here, you see the brown color right here, this is the mesoderm. This mesoderm will basically give you the two coats of the eye, the fibrous and the vascular coats. And if you looked at anatomy of the eye, Sharbini was mentioning you the fibrous coat and the vascular coat, right? The fibrous coat عبارة عن يعني cornea and sclera. This is what it means. It will not give you the cornea and sclera entirely, but it will give you parts of it. Parts of the cornea and sclera. So it's going to give you the fibrous coat, اللي هي الcornea والsclera, and it's going to give you the vascular layer, اللي هي قصدها الكورويد. تمام؟ هي الكورويد مثلا. Okay? This is what the mesoderm of اللي هي ما بين surface ectoderm and neuroectoderm is going to give you. Okay? The final layer is the neural crest cells. And if I were to put the neural crest cells, it would be right here. All right? And these neural crest cells are going to give you basically the same thing. The choroid, right? Parts of the choroid is also going to give you the sclera, and it's also going to give you the part of the cornea. And the cornea are many layers, all right? So corneal endothelium. And you can add here as well, we should add here also the stroma of the iris. يعني connective tissue of the iris. لأن الiris عبارة عن smooth muscle, sphincter pupil, يعني ciliary body, مع stroma, connective tissue. So the neural crest cells is also going to give you the stroma of the iris, all right? بس للحفظ بس I just want to besides that clarify the four sources of the eye, right? Neuroectoderm, the forebrain or surface of the ectoderm. بس just to clarify, we'll clarify this one on the next slide. But for the corneal epithelium and endothelium, بص الكورنيا عبارة عن many layers. في epithelium في endothelium. لو للحفظ لو عايز تعرفها الcorneal epithelium is the outermost layer. يعني cornea is made of many layers. The outermost layer is the epithelium, okay, of this translucent tissue. All right, the corneal epithelium. This is what the surface ectoderm is going to give you outside. Meanwhile, the neural crystal is going to give you the corneal endothelium inside. Okay. بس للتوضيح. Now we finished the development of the lens. So if I asked you where the lens is developed from the surface ectoderm, the retina is developed from where? From the neuroectoderm, the forebrain. Be more specific, optic cup. Okay. وهنشوف الحين اللينس ما اللينس هنشوف الايرس. So the iris نحن شفنا جزئية الايرس هتيجي من النيورال كريستالز، جزئية منها هتجيب الاستروما، والجزئية الثانية من الايرس اللي هي البوستيريور لايرز اللي هو قصده المسلز بتاعه هتيجي من النيورو اكتوديرم. خلينا نشوف من هنا السلايد دي. اوكي هي السلايد development of the iris. ده الكونكتيف تيشو اللي قصدي كانت developed from the neural crystals and here are the muscles. مش الايرس كانت بتعمل pupil constriction dilation بسبب المسلز because of these muscles. And what it meant by posterior layers of the iris when you looked at that slide previously, what it means by posterior layers is that the layers of the iris في anterior و posterior layer زي دي anterior layer وهنا posterior layer. The layers on the posterior end هي نفسها المسلز المسلز دول ده اللي قصده بالposterior layers. اوكي so نفسها dilator pupillae و sphincter pupillae جاي من فين؟ جاي من النيورو ectoderm اوكي of the forebrain او optica براحتك. المهم هي النيورو ectoderm. اوكي بس ده development of the iris. اوكي طيب في شيء بس اقوله اخر شيء قبل ما ندخل للانوميليز انه بالنسبه للاوبتيك كاب. الاوبتيك كاب is composed of two walls. اوكي شايف الاوبتيك كاب دي composed of two walls. The two walls دي يعني originally when the optic cup is developed, when the optic cup was being developed, the two walls were not fused. All right, يعني you had basically, let's imagine this is one wall and this is another wall, and this black line is a lumen. يعني initially the two walls had one wall, an inner wall is going to give you the neural tissue, تمام, the neural tissue, and the outer wall, اللي number 2, is going to give you the epithelium, pigmented epithelium, and in between the inner and the outer wall was a lumen, يسموها interretinal space. See, when the optic cup is developed, the two walls should fuse with one another and obliterate this lumen. Alright, they should obliterate this lumen. Failure of fusion ما بين الانر والاوتر wall يعني neural tissue مع pigmented epithelium of the optic cup will lead to an anomaly يسموها congenital retinal development. تمام؟ congenital retinal detachment قصدي detachment مش development detachment. Okay? you're going to retinal detachment لأنه في lumen يعمل separation between the two walls. حلو بس development of the eye. تمام؟ طيب في early development كنا شفنا الفور سيرفيس وعملنا ترجمنا لكل الاشياء دي. اوكي development of the retina from the walls of the optic cup, inner wall iris retina, outer wall pigment epithelium. اوكي نواف وهي دي ما شايف ده النور لاير والبيجمنت لاير شايف اللومن البيضة دي لازم يكون obliteration لها الانترريتينال سبيس اصلا يعمل obliteration. لو ما حصلت بيعطيك congenital retinal detachment failure of fusion. اوكي فده واحد انومالي. خلصنا الديفلوبمنت هنمشي للانوماليز. اول واحده congenital retinal detachment، الثاني واحده سايكلوبيا يعني الايز بيكون شكل الشخص كده one eyed creature زي المينيونز basically لانه في failure of development في الستركشر في الميدل فيعمل fusion للاي بولز. تمام. ثالث واحده كلوبوما معناها hole of the retina لانه defective closure of the optic fissure. optic هي الكورويد fissure. لو ما حصلت closure of this optic fissure بعد دخلت الارتري خلاص حيكون في gap كده كبير. تمام gap يسموها gap of the retina or coloboma of the retina. بيكون في localized gap في الريتنا. and you will see it if you did an ophthalmoscope. if you did an ophthalmoscope and you looked at the fundus you'll see a white gap in this reddish يعني tissue right on the fundus. هذا coloboma of the retina. رابع واحدة micro ophthalmos. micro معناها small, ophthalmos معناها eye. so the eye here and the orbit are small, underdeveloped compared to this eye. تمام. so micro ophthalmos. خامس واحدة anophthalmia. معناها absence, ophthalmia معناها no eyes. فهتلقى الشخص he looks like Zorro from One Piece. he doesn't have an eye. okay absence of all tissue of the eye. 6 is congenital aphakia. Aphakia دايما افتكر aphakia معناها lens. Congenital aphakia literally means absence of the lens. Okay, the شخص ما يكون عنده lens. Okay, he will not be exhibiting any lens in his eye. Okay, so congenital aphakia. سابع واحدة اللي هي congenital cataract. The person does have a lens, however the lens is not transparent. مش هي transparent المفروض للعين، هنا بتكون cloudy, right, opaque. ليش؟ ممكن acquired ممكن congenital. ممكن if the mother, if she was infected with rubella virus during the first trimester pregnancy, the rubella virus can affect the development and give you congenital cataracts. أو ممكن radiation. أو ممكن حالة اسمها congenital galactosemia. Galactosemia معناها there's accumulation of galactose. هي هذا milk sugar. So if there's a defect in metabolizing galactose, in metabolism في defect, if there's no enzyme breaking down galactose, بيكون في accumulation of galactose, and galactose can lead to the lens being opaque. All right, there's going to be accumulation of galactose. So congenital galactosemia. Okay, that's the causes of congenital cataract. Next is the development of the iris that we've mentioned before. Again, the muscles of the iris from the neuroectoderm, the connective tissue from the neural crest cells. Okay. So the iris is basically developed from these two sources. And two anomalies of the iris specifically is coloboma. Again, coloboma معناها hole. And there is a key-shaped hole. شايف key-shaped? Keyhole. And it's a key-shaped. لما you look at the door and you try to open the door with the key and there's a hole to open it or insert it to, that's the keyhole-shaped defect. تمام؟ بيكون defect في inferior sector of the iris. Or notch in the pupillary margin. Whatever you want to describe it as. Okay? The next one is congenital aneurysm. An معناها absence. Okay. Ira يعني iris. في absence of the iris. Okay. And the iris we mentioned before عبارة عن muscles, right? Wasn't it basically controlling the pupil? Was it going to be dilated or constricted? Well, no iris خلاص هيكون عندك big gap صح؟ بيكون الايرس بتاعه ما الايرس بيكون الايرس ما موجودة والبيوبل بيكون كبير بيكون كده ها شكله زي كده congenital aneurysm لأنه ما فيش iris فهيكون كده big huge pupil. Okay. لأنه خلاص ما فيش iris خلاص هيكون كده big gap of the اللي هي الجاب طبعا الهول اللي اسمها pupil. Okay. Congenital aneurysm.